I'm going to walk you through doing this sleeve placket today. If you look at a nice men's shirt or possibly a blouse or something that you've purchased a little higher end, you'll probably see this type of a placket on it. And it looks a little complicated, but it's actually not too hard. You just need the right tools and you're all set. So I'm starting off, I've got my sleeve cut and I've got it marked. I've got it laying on my table here with the wrong side up. I've got a template that I've made. You can probably find something like this online, or probably even if you are careful, you can probably draft one up yourself. So this is the template that I'm actually going to use for the placket, which was the lighter colored piece on this sleeve here. So what I've done, I'm just going to move my sleeve out of the way, is I've taken a piece, just a regular piece of fabric. I've put a bit of interfacing on it, just an iron-on. Now, you don't always have to put an interfacing in this placket. It just, for demonstration, it just makes it a little bit easier. I can get things pressed quickly. You'll find too, some fabrics are fairly light, so you do want to have a little bit of an interfacing. I wouldn't use anything heavy. I would just use a very lightweight interfacing. Now what I've done is I've taken my template, which is cut out of a piece of cardstock. I've got all my lines on it. Now on your shirt you're going to have a left and a right side. So the interfacing is getting pressed on the wrong side of my fabric. So what I've done, I think you can probably see, is I've actually cut little notches out where all of these lines are, top and bottom, just to make it a little easier for me to draw these lines. And because of the positioning of this, I've actually traced this out so that my lines, when I lay this down on top, I've got all the writing on the wrong side of my fabric. I've taken and I've traced all around here. I've traced into all of these lines. I've made an awl hole here so I could actually mark the top of this little marking here. So I've got the same identical marking drawn on the wrong side of my shirt. Now you don't necessarily have to do all of these lines. You may just need a mark up here on your shirt. You can do it on, if you're using something that's going to wash out or fade, you can do it on the right side. Otherwise I would put your markings on the wrong side. You can also use tailor's tacks, which is another marking tool that you can put in here that you can see from both the right and the wrong side. So I've got all of my marks here. So now I can draw all the lines. Okay, just had to get my pen. So I'm lining my ruler up and I'm drawing my outside line, connecting it. Now this area here is approximately 3/8 of an inch wide. I'm going to start on the other side and draw the same line. And it is also 3/8 of an inch. Now I'm drawing all these lines before I cut it out. That way I can kind of go above and I'm not going to end up with pen all over my table. So my next mark is about 1/2 an inch over. And I'm going to line that up. On this side, at about, let's just measure it just to show you, we are about 3/4 of an inch over. So these measurements can vary. It can be 3/4 of an inch. It can also be an inch. So the distance between this area and the first side of your stitching leg should be the same amount, okay? So now I'm going to draw both sides of my stitching. So this area here, this line that I've drawn around here, is a stitching line that I'm actually going to stitch directly onto the wrong side of my sleeve. The distance between the legs on this line in this long rectangle here should be a 1/2 inch. Okay, so now I'm going to cut this piece out. So I'm cutting on my outside line. I'm going to cut all the way around. I drew around this in pencil, so I don't have a really dark line. Just make sure that you're cutting right on that pencil line. So there, I've got this all cut out. So you can see from here, this is the mirror of it, I've got my lines. Now I haven't drawn my X's here, which are going to be the peak where I press everything. So sometimes I draw these in, sometimes I don't. It's a little easier to actually just fold these in where you need them to be folded when you're pressing it. Okay, so I've just drawn this in. These lines here are going to get folded in just a minute. Okay, so the first step I'm going to do is I'm going to take and I'm going to fold. I've got this is the wrong side. I've got it wrong side up. I'm going to fold in my sides, this first edge, and I'm going to press it. So give it a really good press. I'm going to actually move my sleeve out of the way because I'm pressing it as well. So give it a really good press so that fold is nice and your crease is nice and folded. Go and fold in your other side now. So I've got both sides folded down. Now I'm going to take and I'm going to open up this first fold on the longer side, and I'm just going to give this a press on this side, and I'm going to give it a press just over onto this side as well. Okay, so you see how I've pressed from this side. You can see how I've got my pressing in here. Now I may end up changing this a little bit once I get this sewn down if I don't like how my crease is. Okay, so now I'm ready to place this onto my sleeve. So I've got my sleeve sitting here so that you can see the bottom here. Get this laid out so you can see where I've marked around this edge. So what I want to do is I want to line up my lines at the bottom, and I want to line up this line at the top. Easiest way to do that is I'm going to take a pin and I'm going to poke it right through the top here, and I'm going to make sure that once it's poked through, it's coming through on the corner on the other side. Okay, so I'll show you that again. So I'm poking this right on this corner at the top, and then I am making sure that it's coming directly on the same spot on my sleeve. Okay, so the other really important thing you want to make sure you do when you're sewing your placket on is, so you want your sleeve with your wrong side up, you want your placket with your wrong side up. You also want the longer side that actually has the peaks, you want it towards the front of your sleeve. So if you can see up here, I don't know if you can see, I've got two little marks here. These notches indicate the back of my sleeve. And over here, I've got one little notch. So that indicates the front of my sleeve. So when I have this sewn into my shirt, this area here is going to be closer to the front. This is going to be closer to the back. So you want on your sleeve, you want to have this longer part on the front. So it's actually basically, if you drew a line up, it's coming in at just around the shoulder. Now, depending on the size of your sleeve, this is a little half scale shirt, so the sleeve is much smaller. So on this one, it's coming in below the shoulder point. It may be a little bit closer to the back on a larger shirt, but for this, I've got it so it's just coming in at the shoulder. Now I'm going to put a couple more pins in. So I just want to make sure that as well, pinning right through the bottom and making sure that it's coming through where the bottom of my line is on my actual sleeve. Same thing here, just pulling this through, making sure that everything is lined up. Okay, so you can see how I've got this pinned. Okay, now I'm going to take this over to my machine. And you're going to see how I'm going to stitch around. Now I've got my stitching set at about 3. I may need to shorten this when I get close to the top, but I'll wait and see. So I'm going to start here, right on one leg of my line. I'm going to put my needle down, taking my pin out so I don't run over it. And I'm going to run a couple of stitches forward. Then I'm going to go back to the end. And then I'm going to run my stitches up. So I'm watching my line, my pen line that I'm stitching on is right in the middle of my presser foot. I've got a groove in my presser foot. So that's exactly where the needle is going down. And that's what I'm watching. So I'm coming all the way up to the top, getting close to the top of my corner. And of course, I'm not looking at what I'm stitching, so I'm missing that line. Okay, so I'm coming in, making sure that my needle is going down on the line. I'm going to turn this and I'm going to shorten my stitch to about 2. So I've got a shorter stitch just to be sure that I'm going to end right at the corner. And if you get to the corner and you're not going to end, now I'm luckily going to end right in the corner, but if you get, so your needle is going to go down and it's going to overshoot or it's not going to come quite there, shorten your stitch as much as you can and take your stitch, keep your needle down. Once you're sure you've got it where you want, lift your presser foot, rotate your fabric here. So we're now going to stitch down this side, but lengthen your stitch again. You don't need to have such a short stitch. So once again, I'm trying to keep my eyes on that pen line, making sure that it's lining up with the groove in my presser foot. As I get close to the bottom, I'm just going to take my pin out, back stitch, make sure that my needle is in the upright position. So I've now got this sewn all the way around. I'm going to bring this over to the ironing board so you can see a little better. Okay. No, let's move it over so you can see it. There we go. Okay, so you can see where I've stitched around here. If you look at the reverse side, you can see the stitching. And I'm pretty close to being right on the line, definitely right on the line on that side. Okay, so now I'm going to clip. So I'm going to take and I'm going to cut directly up the middle. So I'm going to slice right up the middle of this piece till I get within 1/4 of an inch, and then I'm going to angle over to the corner. And the idea is that I want to cut right to that stitching. I don't want to cut the thread, but I want to cut right to it. It's very important that you cut right to there. Now you may need to use a nice small sharp scissors, just a little embroidery scissors like I've got here. And how you want to do this is you want to place the point of your scissors at the end of where you want to cut. So I've got them lined up here so that they're going to come right into that corner, and then I'm going to snip. Now I didn't quite get enough, so I can go back and try this again. Move my scissors just in a little bit more. Now what you don't want to do is you don't want to take and put your scissors beyond this point. So if I went to cut and I have my scissors like this thinking, oh, I'll be able to stop right there, that chances are you're not gonna. If you keep your point back of where you want to your scissor cut to end, you'll be a lot more successful. Okay, so now you can see how I've cut this opening in a long Y shape. Okay, so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to press a couple more of my rows here. So I'm going to start with the shorter side. So I'm going to fold on that crease, and I'm going to press that crease again. So I've now folded over twice. So you can see where I've got it folded once, and now I folded twice. So now what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to take this whole placket and I'm going to bring it through the opening so that it's now on the right side of my fabric. So there's my sleeve, and this is all right side out now. So I've got all this piece here. I've got this second fold done. Before I can stitch it, I'm going to take and I've got this pressed, so I've now got the small side of my fold, and if you can see here, I've got, this is my one cut edge. Okay, so I want to take that cut edge and I want to fold it or press it all so that it's going inside or towards the folds in this side of the placket. Okay, so this is the shorter side. So I'm pressing everything in towards the placket. So I've got all my seam pressed in there. So now you see when I fold that placket piece over, I'm covering all of that edge there. The other thing you'll be able to see at this point too is if you look up at the top of this placket, that this edge here is pretty well filling in the top few stitches that I did across that piece. So it's filling that in. All of this should be laying flat up towards the top. I'm going to give this a good press again. So you can see I've got this pressed. Now I'm going to take this to the sewing machine and I'm going to stitch this edge down. Now you can do this either by hand or by machine, but what I'm doing is I'm edge stitching this edge. So I'm just stitching along this edge here. So I'm not going to bring that down too far. So I've got this in my sewing machine, making sure that I'm starting just a little bit beyond the edge of my fabric, putting my needle down, and I'm just catching the edge. And I will do that again because my thread broke. Sometimes it doesn't like starting into this fabric. Okay, let's try this again. So I'm going to run my stitch here. So you can choose to back stitch at this point or not. This is a raw edge. This is actually going to get sewn onto a cuff. So you really don't have to do a lot of back stitching. So I'm just stitching up on the very edge and and you don't want to go too far beyond where the edge of, or the opening of the placket is. Now I am going to back stitch up here, not too many stitches, maybe 3. Okay, so I'm going to take this off the machine here, bring this around again so you can see. So you see how I've got this edge. I'm just going to clip some of these threads so they're not all in the way. So you can see how I've got this edge here. On the reverse side, if you were to look at this placket, you would see that opening that I stitched around and cut. Now, Perfection would have this all along the edge here, but obviously I didn't get Perfection today. So that's one reason why you might want to take and hand stitch it if you want the inside to be perfect. So you can see how I've got from the inside, it actually looks nice and neat. You don't, everything is finished. There's no raw edges even from the inside. So I'm going to flip this back over. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to flip open the other side of my placket, the longer side, and I've got a crease line right along here. So I'm going to take and I'm going to fold this along that crease line and give it a press. Just open it up, make sure you actually did get the crease line. Okay. Like I did on the shorter side, I'm going to take this raw edge and I'm going to press it into my placket. So I've got it pressed inside here. Now I'm going to take, I've got this folded, I'm going to make sure that I've got my edges, my corners folded down. And I'm going to bring this over just like I just covered everything with the shorter side. I'm doing the same with this longer side. Now this is where you want to take a look at your little point up here. Make sure that it looks even on both sides. So I'm going to give this a press, and actually I feel it's pretty even. So I'm not going to change any of the folds up here. So how I'm going to stitch now is you see how I've got this opening. I'm just going to pull that out of the way, not too much because I don't want to distort it, but I'm going to stitch all the way up this side till I get to the top of this edge. I'm going to stitch across one side of the peak, down across the other side, and then I'm going to stitch down about a 1/2 inch. So I'm just going to double check. The idea is all this raw edge here, you want to make sure that you stitch far enough down that you're going to, when you stitch across, sort of forming the side of this like a little side of a house, that when you stitch across here, actually even put a pin in and double check, just flip up, make sure that you see all of the top and the raw edge of the bottom of the placket so that you know you're going to catch it. And you may have to sort of tuck your little corners in, put a pin in maybe at the top here. Make sure you don't pin to your ironing board. Okay, so I'm going to take this to the machine and I'm going to stitch around this here. So I'm going to stitch up this one side. Let's see if I can do it without, oh, I'm not catching my fabric here. Let's try it again. No. So what is, okay, somehow I've got my needle in the wrong position. Okay, so I've got my needle in the center. I'm just going to stitch here. I got to clear a few things out. Back to, here we go. Let's try this again, see if it's going to stitch. Okay, now we're moving forward. So I'm stitching all up this one side, so I'm enclosing the raw edge inside. So I just want to make sure that my other side of my placket is not going to get caught, but is going to be flat underneath. So I'm going to stitch all the way up till I get to the one side. Needle down. I'm going to lift up my presser foot. Now I'm going to stitch around across the one side of the peak till I get to the center. Lift your needle up. If you're not quite sure if you're there yet, like I say, I think I need to shorten my stitch. Take a stitch. That looks a little bit better. I'm going to lift. Anytime you lift the presser foot, make sure your needle is in the down position. So now I'm going to come across this other side and just have a little look there. Feel like I could just do like a little stitch again. I'm going to turn again, pivot one more time. I'm going to go down about a ½ inch, and I've lengthened my stitch too much, so it's doing a basting stitch. So I've got myself at about ½ inch. I'm now going to needle down, pivot, and I'm going to stitch across the top of my placket, or the bottom of my little house piece here. Okay, so I'm going to overshoot that. So I'm going to now what you want to do instead of back stitching is, quite often I just turn and I'll either just stitch back down a couple of stitches, or another thing you can do, I'm just going to back stitch till I get to where I started. You can actually take and you can stitch on an angle from that angle up to this corner. This will give it a little extra reinforcing. If you're going to do this, you may want to draw these lines in with a disappearing marker. It's a little easier to make sure you get them. Now, because I want to do the other side, I've got to come down. So this is really reinforcing the top of this placket. And you really want to have a matching thread, or you want to make sure that you're definitely stitching right over the other, your previous stitching line. Okay, so now I'm just going to come across here. I don't generally like to do this because I find it's a little bit overkill. Now I do have to back stitch. Okay, so yeah, and there you can see how I've got my stitching here. So like I say, this X in the middle, definitely have to draw it in, otherwise you're going to end up with a very odd shaped little X. So here you go. I'm going to show you again on my little blue shirt. So there's my sleeve placket. Okay. And on this one, I've got my sleeve placket ready. So because this is the front of the shirt, if your shirt has a spot for a pleat, now is when you're going to take and you're going to make your pleat. You're going to fold, match your lines. I've got them on the wrong side. Match them so that they line up together, and then just do a little basting stitch across the bottom here. And you're ready now to sew your cuff on, or sew your shirt sleeve up. Wrong side, right sides together. You're going to sew your underarm seam, then you're going to put your cuff on. Okay,